Hi, so my study was environmental connectedness in a high school field science class. Um, in this study, it really started from um, some of these previous findings that shows environmental connectedness really differs from explicit environmental behaviors. So it's really relatively easy to measure environmental behaviors such as recycling or, um, donation to conservation organizations, things like that. But connectedness really seems to be a different idea than that. Um, Now, there's been a handful of studies that have shown that environmental education programs, typically things at parks and museums, have been connected to improving connectedness. But a lot of those programs aren't necessarily explicitly things from in schools. Um, Even though the importance of environmental issues is by no means a secret, environmental topics are really a lot of times treated as additions to the curriculum instead of things that really need to be there in the first place. And so when things become additions, those are also the first things to get removed. And so I really wanted to look at what is the value of this idea to make sure that it can be treated as something that needs to be there instead of a simple addition. Um, Also, temporary experiences in nature may fail to connect to previous experiences and then fail to be educative experiences in sort of the Deweyan sense of the word. So what tends to happen in schools is if an environmental topic isn't cut, it's treated as a very temporary experience, a one-off short trip to a park or something like that. And those may not be able to connect into really an educative experience. Now, some of the difficulties here is that, first of all, environmental connectedness is often difficult for people to verbalize. And so an individual themselves, and especially when we start looking at young individuals, can have a hard time really expressing connectedness. And so it's not something you can ask where you can ask someone, do you recycle? It's difficult to necessarily get them to recognize, are you connected? And so you can ask them, how do you feel connected? But really have to look at the responses to understand whether or not they are actually connected. Now, Enos Mills, the essayist and conservationist, saw parks as great outdoor schools. And I think that's an idea and a kind of a philosophy that still has a lot of value. And I think that perspective of using parks as outdoor schools is something we still should be looking at. Also, Richard Louv coined the term nature deficit disorder to represent the human cost of alienation of nature. And so we are dealing with a very immediate problem in that we have basically a generation of children that are growing up largely indoors. So studying for this class was an upper-level elective field science course in rural Midwestern high school. K-12, all students are within the same building, and that's about 70 students right now. 70% of those are low SES. I personally was the teacher for this class, and I'm the only science teacher, 7 through 12. The course consisted of field trips to a local state park, and so students could choose one field trip between two choices in each set. And so the first set, students could choose between Introduction to Experiencing Nature or Introduction to Exploration. And then the second set, they could choose from photography or journaling. And so those were offered to hopefully give more opportunities for students to connect on a field trip that really fit well with them. Enrolled in the course were 7 students, and the final project of this course was actually for these 7 students to organize a field trip to that same state park for the elementary school. And so those students each, sometimes working in pairs, sometimes alone, created stations for that field trip to share their experiences and then create new experiences for the elementary students. So I had 2 participants for the study itself of the 7 students. The first was Ashley. She's a junior girl, and this is her first year in the district. She lives in town. She lives with her mom, who's a single mom, and her sister. Her mom is a teacher in the school. She's involved in several sports, basically a sport every season, and activities, student council, and that sort of thing. she really admitted to having very few experiences in nature before the course. She's generally a high-achieving student, but really kind of admitted to enrolling in this course just because it seemed like the best option available for that class period. Second student was Joseph. Joseph is a senior boy. He's been in the district since he's in elementary school. He lives out on a pretty remote road, so he lives down a kind of dirt country road. He's involved in a few activities in school, music, drama, but not as extensively as involved as Ashley. And Joseph really talked about having some fairly extensive experiences in nature previous to the course, although he said that not necessarily a whole lot of them were at this specific state park, even though he'd lived near it for a long time. So Ashley enrolled in the course because she thought it was the best thing available in that class period. One of the things that she really connected with, she said that her most meaningful experience was taking pictures on the photography tree. And the quote was, because she was more attracted to seeing the overall view of everything. And so this picture up here in the corner, this was actually the picture she identified as the most meaningful to her. And she said, quote, "The dam was probably the picture that I liked the most. The water was in sync all throughout the whole dam. It was really pretty when it was flowing down into the bottom. I really enjoyed this the most. It reminded me of the little waterfall that I saw on my first trip. I really enjoy waterfalls because I think those are so pretty." And so this was actually not a planned stop for the trip. It was something a student noticed and wanted to stop. And so he took kind of an opportunistic chance to go and look at it. When looking deeper into her experience, she did not show signs of connectedness because she kept talking about nature as something separate from herself. And so when she would refer to things, she would talk about nature separately from how she would speak of herself. When it was her turn to create an activity for elementary students, she took them out to draw because she really enjoyed her photography experience. And so she was going to have students draw to try to recreate that. And one of the things she really struggled with is that some of the places she took pictures just aren't practical to take an entire elementary school. And it really took her a while to get past that. And I think in that we see that she hadn't really connected with nature because she couldn't extend that experience at one spot beyond it to other locations. Now, Joseph enrolled in the course because he thought it sounded like fun. He has science courses. He has the science electives. He didn't need it. He thought it sounded like fun. He actually was attending the other field trip options from Ashley. And a lot of times on field trips, he kind of struck out on his own. He was one that was sort of wandering off on his own quite a bit and really wanted to choose his own path. When I asked him directly about his connectedness to nature, and again, people a lot of times have a hard time verbalizing this, so you really have to look at their language and their word choice. He goes, "I guess I feel more protective of nature. Sometimes when I see a lot of trash, I pick it up now." One of the things he really connected with was this place that I called Mr. Clay's office, I called my office on the first field trip. It's a little rock formation tucked back into a bluff. Nothing really geologically significant about it. It's somewhere that in my time at the park, I've just always noticed and thought, oh, that's kind of a cool place. And I shared that with the students that I'd always kind of thought of it as, oh, that would be a cool office for me. And that was an idea he really seemed to connect with. During the elementary field trip, I personally observed him asking students to pick up any litter they saw. And so it really extended beyond just saying, oh, I shouldn't litter, to a very intentional effort to pick up trash themselves, encourage others to pick up trash, and really want to leave that park a better place than when he arrived. On the field trip, Joseph created a station for the elementary students to try fishing, and actually had a couple kids have some success, which was surprising. And so the findings here, there appears to be a relationship between cognitive awareness and experience informing connectedness. And it really seems like previous experiences are necessary. So to really become connected, you have to be able to connect some of the cognitive awareness or new ideas you're having with a handful of previous experiences. A sense of ownership and respect seems to be a solid indicator of connectedness. And cognitive awareness alone does not indicate connectedness. So you can't just survey out connectedness from someone, because Ashley, said, of course I'm connected to nature. When we start looking at it, she is, well, I'm connected to nature, but she always refers to it separate. And so just a cognitive awareness, or just a simple question of, do you think you're connected to nature, is really not going to answer the question. It also seems that reservoirs of sensory information are really necessary for experiencing and connecting with nature. And so to really form connectedness, what students really need are reservoirs of sensory information. Those are only going to come from experiences. And they need that sensory information to be able to connect what they are learning with in order to become connected. And so factual awareness here cannot be a stand-in for assessing connectedness. You can't put a survey item that says, are you aware that littering is bad, as a stand-in for are you really connected with nature? And with that need for previous experiences, schools need to provide frequent experiences in nature for young students. Because we've talked about in the Richard Louv sense of nature deficit, students and children are not spending time outdoors. If they're not spending time outdoors outside of schools, and if these previous experiences are completely necessary to become environmentally connected, schools are going to need to provide that. And especially if a school says that environmental connectedness or environmental responsibility is an important goal to them, they're going to have to provide frequent experiences, and they have to start that at a young age. So when students are older and you really have the chance to form strong connectedness in those strong sort of significant life experiences, they're going to have that base of previous experiences. Coming from an ecology background, this next thing's a little bit difficult to say, but I think it's something really important, and that is that we need to depart from the Bobadilla model of conservation. Bobadilla was a Senegalese poet. He has this very famous quote, almost any zoo or museum you go to, you'll see it painted somewhere. And the quote is, in the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. And as far as promoting environmental awareness, promoting conservation, this is a very prevalent idea. But the problem is, it was written in the 1960s in Senegal. People had experiences in nature. People had experiences outdoors. And so if you cognitively taught them, you gave them the cognitive awareness, they tied that to that extensive set of previous experiences, and they absolutely could become connected. Many of our Western students have the exact opposite set of problems. They have a lot of cognitive awareness, but they have very few experiences to tie it to. And that means that we can't follow this model that at times, and still today in certain places, is highly successful. That model isn't going to fit most of our Western students in helping them become environmentally connected. As far as future research topics, I think the impact of age would be really interesting to look into. Also, can you substitute single longer trips, mostly because of the ability for urban schools to access natural areas. This was in a rural setting. It was about a 30-minute drive to a state park, which made it possible to do multiple trips. But for schools that don't have that luxury, can you substitute a single longer trip? Or can you substitute a single longer trip in terms of offering a spring break or summer course to focus on this? How are experiences different for rural and urban students? So my students, even if they lived in town, they hadn't spent a lot of time outside. Our town economy is based on the agriculture industry, and so there is kind of this inherent, we are connected to nature, because in drought years the economy tanks. And so would that be different for urban students? And then what are really kind of the best practices that promote environmental experiences for younger students? Is it taking them out to a park and letting them explore? Is it taking them out to a park with a scavenger hunt checklist? What are those best practices, especially for the younger students? Overall, I think this is a really interesting topic. I think it's one that really needs to be investigated. To me, if environmental responsibility, environmental connectedness, environmental awareness, if those are important to a teacher or a school, And this is a conversation, and this is a topic we really need